Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world that smells of pine resin and wood smoke. A world where the air is sharp with cold, where every sound of rustling brush might be a deer or something hungrier. You are here at the edge of the frontier, boots sinking into earth that has never felt the weight of pavement, hands itching with the thought of chopping down the wilderness itself. This is the land of mountain men, and while you might picture them as grizzled loners with impossibly long beards and questionable hygiene, they were also builders, carpenters, and problem solvers. They had to be, with no hardware store, no YouTube tutorials, and no Amazon deliveries. A cabin didn't appear by magic. It rose, one exhausting log at a time, hammered and hacked into being by people who thought, yeah, sure, I'll fight a bear before breakfast and then build my own roof, beams by sundown. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. But don't worry, you won't actually have to lift an axe tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I'm always curious about the little corners of the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, squinting against the sun, as it breaks over peaks so sharp they look painted. The frontier stretches before you. No neatly drawn boundaries, no neighbors' chimneys smoking in the distance. Just forest, streams, and the low call of a raven drifting somewhere unseen. The mountain men came into this world with rifles, traps, and just enough tools to convince themselves they could survive. The truth is, a log cabin wasn't just a house. It was the difference between life and frostbite, between solitude and safety. Historians still argue whether most mountain men built with long-term homesteading in mind, or whether cabins were temporary bases before they wandered again, chasing fur and adventure. But as you shoulder your axe, it's obvious that once you cut into these trees, you're committing to more than a campsite. You're making a claim on the land. The first sensation you notice is silence, not the city's silence with its faint hum of traffic, but deep silence, broken only by wind shifting branches or the distant trickle of a stream. It's unsettling. You feel small, and maybe you mutter a joke to yourself just to break it. Something like, great, if a bear shows up, at least the acoustics are good for my screaming. Humor, thin as it is, keeps you sane. But then you remember the stories. Cabins standing for decades, timber walls blackened by smoke, carved initials of the builder who swung an axe in the year 1821 or 1836. Those rough shelters still tell their stories through the marks left on the wood. Step closer and imagine choosing your first tool, not a sleek chainsaw with safety goggles, but a heavy iron axe with a handle that already feels like it will blister your palms. You grip it anyway, feeling its weight drag at your arm. Mountain men sometimes carried a broad axe for squaring, logs and adze for smoothing, and a simple saw for trimming lengths. No luxury, no backups. You used what you had until the handle snapped, then carved another by lantern light. A quirky tidbit, some men swore by sharpening their blades with river stones because the water whispered where the edge should be. Was that true wisdom, or just poetic nonsense muttered by someone who hit their thumb too many times? Hard to say. You march further in. Pine needles crunch underfoot, and somewhere a squirrel scolds you like you've trespassed on his personal empire. Maybe you have, but you keep walking, because this is the first step to something permanent. You're carving out a home from wilderness, and that's no small thing. Imagine trying to explain this to someone from the future. Yes, I could have built a tent, but no. I wanted to move several tons of trees into a stack and call it cozy. They'd probably just nod politely and back away. What you don't see yet is the rhythm you'll fall into. Every swing of the axe will soon become a heartbeat. Thunk, pause, breath, thunk, pause, breath. The mountain men lived by rhythms, hunting seasons, woodcutting seasons, even the rhythm of weather. And tonight, as you step into their world, you can almost feel the frontier settling around you like a heavy blanket. Your boots are damp from crossing a small stream. Your shoulders ache from carrying a pack. But already, your mind is searching for where the cabin could stand. This first section isn't about walls or roofs. It's about standing still in the wilderness and saying, "Here, this is where I'll fight the snow and see if I can outlast it." Of course, some of those first cabins were laughably rough. Historical records describe huts so crooked they looked like a drunk man's handwriting. Others, surprisingly neat. Tight-fitted logs, moss-caulked so well that winter winds couldn't sneak through. Historians still debate whether the difference was skill or just time. Did the first attempt always collapse into a comedy of errors? Or were some mountain men secretly genius carpenters disguised as fur trappers? Either way, your first step into this story is clear. Your life in the wilderness begins with an axe, a vision, and the silence of untamed land waiting for its first scar of civilization. And with that, you take a long, steady breath, feeling the enormity of what's ahead. 15 tons of logs, weeks of labor, months of survival. The adventure begins not with the first log raised, but with your boots pressing down on soil that no one else has claimed. The whisper of trees bending as if they're already aware you're here to cut them down. You pause at the edge of a clearing, sweat dampening your shirt despite the mountain air, and realize you can't just start chopping trees at random. A cabin isn't only wood, it's location, location, location. The mountain men knew this, even if they didn't phrase it like a real estate agent with too much coffee. You scan the terrain, thinking about water first. A stream nearby means easy access to drinking water, and a handy way to clean hides or clothes, but too close and spring floods could wash away your hard work. You eye a bubbling creek, then step back 50 yards, weighing safety against convenience. Historians still argue whether these men planned ahead carefully or simply dropped their cabins wherever exhaustion forced them to stop. Either way, the wrong choice meant months of misery. The next thought is sunlight. You tilt your head, tracking the arc of the sun through branches. Too shaded, and you'll freeze in winter. Too exposed, and summer heat will cook you inside your log oven. Some trappers swore by building their cabins with the door facing east, catching the first light of dawn to warm them after bitter nights. Others just shrugged and built wherever the trees looked thinnest. The quirky detail here, a few men even, oriented their cabins toward the nearest saloon or trading post trail, as if keeping that path in sight was a kind of psychological comfort. Not practical, but when you're living off beans and jerky, the thought of whiskey on the horizon matters. You step through underbrush, your boots brushing damp ferns. The smell of soil is sharp, mixed with resin from freshly broken twigs. Every part of you is alert, searching for a spot that feels right, not too close to game trails. You don't need elk trampling your walls, not too high on a ridge where lightning loves to strike. Somewhere steady, dry, and sheltered. The forest has its own logic, and you're trying to read it like a book written in bark and moss. You picture winter storms, winds shrieking through gaps, snow piling against walls, a cabin tucked into a natural windbreak, say, behind a cluster of thick pines or beneath a rocky outcrop, could mean survival. Without it, you'll spend nights patching holes while your fire sputters. You crouch low, brushing pine needles aside, checking if the ground drains or pools. Imagine the regret of choosing a swampy hollow that turns into a mud pit every spring. No thanks. And then there's wood. You glance around, counting the straight, thick trunks you'll have to cut. You need a small forest's worth of timber, but dragging each log more than 100 yards is torture. You'll curse every day. A good site is close to water, sunlight, shelter, and most of all, trees you can swing an axe into tomorrow morning. The balance feels impossible, but it's a puzzle. Mountain, men solved over and over, often by instinct. One scholar's diary from the 1830s mentions picking a site because the earth was firm enough that my boots rang hollow when I stomped, and that sound pleased me. Was this practical, geotechnical knowledge, or just poetic nonsense? Historians still argue whether frontier builders actually tested soil with their heels, or if that was just one man romanticizing his blisters. You, of course, give it a try, stomping once and listening. The ground thuds back, not hollow, but steady, as if it agrees to carry the weight of your future cabin. The silence deepens, broken by the occasional caw of a crow circling overhead. You lean against a tree and imagine the cabin's outline in front of you. Rough logs, stacked waist-high, smoke curling from a chimney. It's easier to dream than to build, but the dreaming matters. You sketch it in your mind. Door here, fire pit there, maybe a tiny window if you feel fancy. The mental blueprint anchors you, helps you push aside the panic of, what if I freeze before the walls are done? Jokes bubble up even now. You mutter, well, at least when the wolves come sniffing, they'll admire the craftsmanship. Sarcasm, again, keeping you sane, but under the humor is resolve. This place, this patch of forest, near water, sunlight, and solid ground, feels right. You scratch a mark into a nearby trunk with the axe, claiming it in your own way. You kneel, running fingers through moss. It's damp, but not swampy. It could even serve as insulation once you start building. Stuffed between logs to keep wind out. Everything here offers a clue, a tool, a piece of your cabin before it exists. That's the odd comfort of wilderness. Nothing is wasted if you know how to look. Finally, You sit back on your heels, eyes sweeping the space. One more time, you'll need to clear brush, mark trees, and think through how to drag each log. But tonight, it's enough to know you've chosen. Your boots rest on the foundation of your future, even if it's invisible for now. The forest hums around you, indifferent, patient. You can almost hear it saying, "All right then, let's see if you're stubborn enough to stay." Your chosen spot feels almost sacred now, a patch of earth that will become something more than just dirt and roots. But before walls can rise, the forest has to fall, at least a little. You heft the axe again, its handle rough against your palms, and walk up to the first tall pine. It towers above you, branches whispering in the breeze like it knows what's coming. There's no ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just you, an axe, and a whole lot of muscle about to be sore. You take a deep breath, plant your feet, and swing. The blade bites with a hollow thunk, sending vibrations up your arms. Sap oozes almost immediately, sticky and sweet-smelling, as though the tree itself is trying to glue your hands in place. Cutting down a tree by hand is slow work. There's rhythm, sure, swing, twist, pull back, but mostly it's sweat and stubbornness. Wood chips fly, sticking in your hair and clinging to your shirt like a badge of progress. The sound echoes through the forest, a steady drumbeat of steel against grain. You keep glancing upward, half expecting the tree to give up and crash after 5 swings. But of course it doesn't. Mountain men sometimes spent half a day on one trunk, pacing themselves, sharpening axes, muttering curses that probably scared away half the wildlife. Historians still argue whether most men preferred pine or oak for cabins, since pine was easier to cut, but oak lasted longer. You don't get the luxury of debate. You'll take whatever is closest and straight enough to stack. Your shoulders ache quickly, but you can't stop. Every slice into the trunk is an unspoken promise. This will become a wall, a roof, a hearth. There's no shortcut. A quirky detail from frontier lore says some men swore at their trees to make them fall faster, yelling insults like stubborn, mule, or lazy giant. You're tempted to try it. "Come on, tree, I skipped arm day for this," you mutter, half laughing at yourself. The tree, unsurprisingly, does not care. Finally, with sweat running down your temples, and the notch deep on one side, you step back to cut the other. There's a crack, a groan almost, and suddenly the whole trunk shivers. It leans, hesitates, and then crashes with a roar that shakes the ground. Branches splinter, birds scatter, and the silence afterward feels like a held breath finally released. You grin, breathless, because you just turned a giant into lumber. But one tree isn't enough, not even close. You need dozens, each felled and trimmed. You trudge to the next, muscles protesting, and begin again. The smell of resin thickens in the air, sharp and almost medicinal. It sticks to your hands, your clothes, your hair, until you feel more like a walking pine cone than a person. Still, you keep swinging. This is the part no one romanticizes in stories. The endless grind, the blistered hands, the way your arms tremble by evening. But without it, there is no cabin. You pause to catch your breath, leaning on the axe handle. The clearing looks different already. Patches of sunlight where trees once stood, logs scattered like fallen soldiers. You'll have to trim branches, strip bark, and drag each one closer to your building site. That thought alone nearly makes you sit down and reconsider every life choice that led you here. But the cabin won't build itself. Some men used teams of oxen or horses to drag logs, but many mountain men had only their own backs. You think about that as you size up your pile, wondering if your spine is secretly drafting a resignation letter. Historians still argue whether most cabins were communal projects, with neighbors pitching in, or whether the lone man myth is closer to the truth. Judging by your aching shoulders, you hope the neighbor help version is more accurate. Still, you press on, because waiting for help in the wilderness often meant waiting forever. You pick up a fallen branch, smooth and sap-sticky, and catch yourself twirling it like a makeshift walking stick. For a moment, you imagine yourself in a cartoon montage, logs falling perfectly, sweat glistening heroically, no blisters in sight. Then reality cuts in. Your palms sting, your shirt is torn, and there's dirt on your face you don't remember earning. At least you can laugh. You mutter, "Frontier Gym, membership free." But the workouts are mandatory. As dusk creeps in, the pile of felled trees grows. The forest around you feels changed, lighter, more open, but also strangely watchful. You've left scars here, and the wilderness doesn't forget. A chill runs down your spine. Though whether from the evening, air, or the weight of your task, you can't say. You sit on one of the logs, the sticky bark tugging at your clothes, and look at what you've done. It's only the beginning, but already the cabin feels possible. The forest has given up its first offering, and now it's your turn to shape it into shelter. The stars will rise soon, sharp pinpricks against the endless dark. You'll need a fire, some rest, and the resolve to wake up tomorrow and do it all again. But for now, you lean back, sap on your hands, wood chips in your boots, and let yourself feel the smallest spark of pride. One log at a time, a cabin is being born. Morning mist hangs low across the clearing, curling around the trunks you dropped yesterday, like smoke that refuses to leave. Your shoulders groan in protest before you even stand, reminding you of the punishment you handed them with the axe. But the trees lying across the forest floor are only half done. Felling them is one thing, shaping them into cabin logs is another. You grab the axe again, testing its edge with a thumb. Dull already. You crouch near a flat rock, grinding the blade against it until sparks dance. A sharp axe is life out here. Without it, you're just swinging dead weight. You step to the first trunk, sap hardened into tacky streaks, branches still jutting like ribs. The process begins with limbing, knocking those branches away until the log is clean. Each swing sends twigs flying, the forest echoing with dry snaps. The smell shifts from sharp pine to something warmer, almost sweet. By the time you've stripped one tree, sweat is running down your back, despite the morning chill. Multiply that by dozens, and you begin to understand why mountain men's arms looked like they were carved from oak themselves. Stripping bark is next, and here you meet your new best friend. the draw knife, or, if you're less lucky, just your axe blade, used sideways. You dig under the bark, peeling long strips that curl away like old wallpaper. Some builders claimed bark left on the logs invited bugs, rot, and mold. Others insisted it added insulation. Historians still argue whether the bark really mattered or if it was just an excuse to make apprentices do more grunt work. You, however, scrape and scrape, partly for practicality, and partly because the smooth, pale wood beneath looks satisfying, like uncovering the log's clean bones. Then comes notching, the art of cutting the ends so they'll lock together at the corners. Without good notches, the whole cabin leans like a tipsy drunk, and you don't want to wake up one night with a log rolling onto your face. The technique is simple in theory. Carve a saddle-shaped hollow at one end, chop a corresponding shape at another. But in practice, it's maddening. Too shallow, and gaps yawn open. Too deep, and the log loses strength. You mutter under your breath with each attempt, telling yourself, yeah, sure, I totally went to Log Cabin University and majored in notching. Dragging comes after shaping, and here's where your back joins the protest chorus. Each log weighs hundreds of pounds, far more than one person should budge. Yet you do, tying ropes, wedging sticks as levers, pushing with legs until the trunk slides reluctantly across the dirt. The sound grates, wood grinding against earth, bark snagging roots. Your boots dig trenches into the soil. Some men greased skids with animal fat to help the logs slide more easily. A quirky trick that doubled as bear bait if you weren't careful. Imagine explaining to your neighbors that the reason your cabin never got built is because a black bear followed the smell of bacon grease and stole your building materials. By midday, your hands are blistered, palms raw, even through rough gloves. You look down at them, flexing fingers, and think how quickly necessity carves you into something tougher. Each log dragged into the pile near your chosen site feels like another victory, though you can't help but count how many remain and groan at the math. Building a cabin is nothing but repetition. Cut, strip, notch, drag, and yet within that monotony, something monumental grows. You pause to drink from the creek, cold water numbing your lips, and glance back at the half-cleared clearing. It looks less like wilderness now, more like the beginnings of order imposed by sweat. The logs, stacked neatly, are no longer trees. They're potential walls. The air hums with insects. The sun burns higher, and your arms quiver each time you lift the axe again. You make a joke to yourself. Great. I came out here to be Daniel Boone, and now I'm just Daniel Blister. Humor is thin medicine, but it keeps you going. By late afternoon, the pile of prepared logs has grown tall enough to cast its own shadow. You lean against it, shirt soaked, wood shavings clinging to every surface of you. For a moment, you wonder if this is foolish, breaking your body to build a box of wood when you could have pitched a tent. Historians still argue whether some cabins were more symbolic than practical, proof of a man's intent to stay rather than purely functional shelters. Whatever the debate, you know one thing. When winter wind howls, a tent won't keep you alive. A cabin just might. As twilight deepens, You drag the last log into place, dropping onto it like a bench. Your arms buzz with fatigue, your knees ache, but the sight of the stacked wood is its own strange reward. The forest feels quieter around you now, as if acknowledging the effort. Tomorrow, you'll begin raising the first walls, but tonight you sit among the logs, the scent of raw timber heavy in the air, and feel that for the first time, the cabin isn't just an idea. It's real, rough, and waiting to rise. The morning greets you with stiff muscles and the ache of yesterday's work still hanging heavy in your arms. But when you glance at the stacked pile of logs, you feel something new, anticipation. Until now, you've been preparing pieces, sweating over each notch and bark strip. Today, you begin to see them come together. Raising the first walls is more than carpentry. It's the moment when wilderness starts to look like home. You study the logs, trying to choose which will serve as the foundation. The first layer, called the sill logs, has to be the straightest, thickest, and most rot-resistant you can find. Pine works, but if you're lucky enough to find cedar or oak, you'll thank yourself in a decade when the walls are still standing. You pick the stoutest logs and roll them into place, forming a rough rectangle. It looks like nothing more than a child's toy blocks for now, but you can already imagine walls climbing skyward. Balancing the next logs on top is tricky business. Alone, you grunt and strain, rolling one up onto the base. Your back screams in protest, and you wobble as it teeters dangerously before settling into its notches. Historians still argue whether most cabins were built entirely solo or if men occasionally bartered labor with neighbors. I'll help raise your walls if you help raise mine. The lone mountain man myth is strong, but logic suggests most cabins went up faster with more hands. You, however, are stuck with only your determination and a slightly sarcastic inner monologue. Sure, who needs help when you've got lower back pain? Each log stacked makes the structure feel sturdier. The air smells of fresh cut wood, resin still bleeding from the trunks. As you climb up to adjust notches, sweat stings your eyes, sawdust clings to your skin, but the rhythm pulls you along. Lift, balance, fit, repeat. By midday, the walls rise, waist high, and you pause, leaning against them as though they're already shelter. The wind sounds different inside this half-formed box, muffled and muted, as if the cabin itself is starting to carve out its own pocket of quiet. Not everything goes smoothly, of course. One log catches wrong in its notch, sticking out at an ugly angle. You groan, climb down, and wrestle it again. It slides free, nearly flattening your toes before you shove it aside. Well, you mutter, at least if I die, my tombstone will say, Death by DIY project. Gallows humor feels appropriate when surrounded by lumber that outweighs you 10 times over. By the time the walls are chest high, you notice how the space transforms. It's no longer an open clearing. It's a room without a roof. Sunlight slants across the stacked logs, catching the grooves of your axe marks, the fingerprints of your labor. You imagine sitting by a fire in here months from now, snow howling outside, while the cabin holds firm. The thought steadies you, makes the pain in your shoulders worth enduring. Some cabins were built with precise corner joints that would impress any modern carpenter. tight as puzzle pieces. Others leaned and gapped, patched with mud later to cover mistakes. Historians still argue whether the rougher builds were simply due to lack of tools, or whether the builders cared more about speed than beauty. Either way, the cabin always told its own story in the fit of its logs, a visible signature of the man who raised it. Yours, right now, reads something like determined, exhausted, slightly crooked, but functional. As evening shadows lengthen, you place one last log, the walls now shoulder high. You step back, surveying the shape. It's humble, uneven, and yet there it is, a cabin in embryo. Birds flit past, curious, perching on the upper logs as though inspecting your work. You laugh softly, telling them, "Yeah, it's not much yet, but give me time." For a moment, you almost wish you had an audience, someone to marvel at what you've wrestled out of the wilderness. But the silence of the forest is its own applause, and that's enough. You sink onto a stump, sweat cooling, hands raw, and let yourself feel the pride creeping in beneath the exhaustion. For the first time, you're not just surviving the wilderness, you're shaping it. Tomorrow, the walls will grow taller, and soon a roof will loom overhead. Tonight, though, you sit within the crude skeleton of your future home, listening to crickets tune their nighttime chorus, while the forest quietly accepts that you are here to stay. You wake to a stiff back and hands that feel like sandpaper, but the moment your eyes land on the rising walls, a spark pushes you forward. The logs are stacked solidly now, chest high, a boxy promise of safety. Yet without a roof, it's still a glorified fence. Rain, snow, even falling pine needles will pour straight in unless you climb higher, push harder, and crown this wooden skeleton with a lid. Today, you start building the roof. The first challenge is figuring out how steep you want it. A shallow roof is easier, faster, less timber to cut, but it will sag under snow, and up here in the mountains, snow is not a polite dusting. It's a smothering weight that can crush carelessness. A steeper roof will shed weather, but demands more work, longer poles, and riskier climbs. Historians still argue whether most frontier cabins leaned toward function over form, or whether some builders actually considered aesthetics. After all, a steep gable looks dramatic against the sky. You, standing there with sore muscles and no ladder but a tree trunk, your pretending is one. Lean firmly toward whatever won't collapse on my head. You haul ridge poles into place, grunting, as they wobble dangerously above. Balancing one on the rising walls is a moment of heart-thumping panic. It could fall, it could crush, it could undo all the hours you've already poured into this project. But finally it settles, wedged into its notches, a backbone for the roof. You breathe out slowly, palms trembling from the strain. "Congratulations," you mutter to yourself. You just invented back pain at a higher altitude. Then come the rafters, slender logs or poles angled upward, leaning against the ridge like ribs of a giant beast. You climb carefully, bracing each piece, driving pegs into place to hold them. The forest watches quietly, the sound of your hammering echoing through trees. Sweat pours down your forehead, despite the crisp air. With each rafter raised, the shape of a real cabin sharpens. It's no longer just four walls. It's becoming a shelter, a structure with height and presence. Once the frame stands, you face choices again. Shingles, thatch, bark, or just overlapping planks. Cedar shingles are durable, but they take endless hours to split. Bark is faster, stripped in sheets, but curls and rots quickly. Grass thatch works, if woven thick, but invites every bird in a 5-mile radius to help itself. A quirky detail. Some men simply layered poles, covered them with dirt, and let grass sprout, turning their roofs into miniature meadows. It looked charming until rain poured through the soil and dripped onto your bedroll. You, standing there with blistered palms and limited patience, weigh the options and reach for bark and poles. Quick, if not elegant. The work is tedious. Strip, lay, nail. Strip, lay, nail. The roof slowly grows. A patchwork of wood and bark angled to defy the sky. You pause often, perched precariously above the half-built walls, staring at the view. From up here, the clearing spreads wide, the mountains jagged beyond, the forest stretching in green waves. For a heartbeat, you almost forget your exhaustion. It's beautiful, wild, and terrifying all at once. Then, your foot slips on bark, and you clutch a rafter, heart slamming. Great, you mutter. Death by roof. At least I'd make a funny cautionary tale. By late afternoon, the roof is mostly covered. Sunlight filters through small gaps, but the frame is solid, the shape distinct. You crawl down stiffly, every joint protesting, and step back to admire it. The cabin looks different now, less fragile, more defiant. It stands not just as a box of logs, but as a true shelter, a silhouette against the sinking sun. Birds swoop around it curiously, perching on the peak, as if to test its strength. Historians still argue whether cabins were truly watertight, or if settlers simply accepted a few leaks as inevitable. You know the truth will reveal itself with the first storm, when you'll either sleep dry or spend the night cursing every drop that falls on your forehead. For now, though, pride overrides doubt. You've crowned your walls with a roof, shaky but real, and transformed an empty frame into a place that can stand against the sky. As twilight deepens, you sit by your fire, watching smoke rise and curl toward the new roof line. It's not perfect, but neither are you. And maybe that's the point. This cabin, crooked or straight, patched or proud, carries your sweat in every notch and splinter. It may not be pretty, but it is yours. Tomorrow, you'll seal the gaps and test its strength. Tonight, you simply lean back, listening to the first drops of evening dew patter harmlessly against the bark above. Morning greets you not with a rooster's crow, but with a stiff shoulder, the kind you only get after hauling half a forest onto your roof. You glance upward. The bark and poles you laid yesterday still cling stubbornly in place. No disasters, no collapses overnight. A small victory, yet as you crawl out of the half-finished cabin, a sharp breeze slips through cracks between logs, reminding you those walls might stand tall, but they leak like a sieve. Today, you turn your attention to sealing them, because the mountains won't wait politely while you figure out how to keep warm. The gaps stare back at you, thin lines of daylight threading between logs. In summer, they let in breezes and bugs. In winter, they'd be cruel little funnels for cold. You need chinking, a frontier word for stuffing anything you can find into those cracks. Clay mixed with mud works best, though it dries and crumbles. Moss, leaves, even animal hair can be shoved in to fill the spaces. Some mountain men swore by clay and grass, others by lime plaster, if they could barter for it. Historians still argue whether cabins were regularly re-chinked every season, or if settlers simply tolerated drafty corners until frostbite made the decision for them. You kneel with a bucket of sloppy clay, scooping handfuls and smearing it into seems like frosting a crooked cake. It squishes under your fingers, messy but strangely satisfying. Moss gets pressed in as a filler, the green tufts peeking between logs until you smear more clay to lock them down. Soon, your hands are brown to the elbows, your clothes streaked like a toddler who discovered finger paint. You catch yourself chuckling. This is your new normal. A quirky tidbit. Some cabins included bits of fabric, old shirts, even scraps of letters shoved between logs for insulation. One archaeologist once found a fragment of a hymn book used as chinking, still legible centuries later. Imagine stuffing your poetry into a wall and some future historian treating it like treasure. You eye your own torn shirt sleeve and briefly consider ripping it off for the cause. Then decide modesty is underrated when mosquitoes still roam. The work is slow. Every gap demands attention. You stretch, kneel, crawl, reaching high between logs to smear mud until your shoulders ache. The smell of damp clay fills your nose, earthy and grounding. At times, you imagine the forest itself is helping, the soil willingly lending pieces of itself to shield you. Other times, when the clay drops back out in clumps, you mutter darkly that even the earth seems to be mocking your efforts. By midday, the walls look patched, mottled with stripes of brown and green. From inside, the effect is even more striking. Sunlight no longer pierces freely, shadows deepen, and the cabin feels enclosed, cocoon-like. It's not perfect. Thin drafts still whisper through, a reminder that you're no master builder. But compared to yesterday, it's a transformation. The place finally feels like a room rather than a pile of logs stacked hopefully together. You pause for lunch, chewing jerky that tastes like leather, dipped in salt, while staring at your handiwork. Pride and exhaustion tangle inside you. You've sealed the walls, but every mountain man knew it was a battle that never ended. Clay crumbles in rain, moss shrivels, mice dig through for nesting. The war against drafts is eternal. You, with mud still crusting under your fingernails, are merely fighting the first round. Afternoon light slants low, and you test your work. Inside the cabin, you close the half-finished door frame with a makeshift board and strike flint. A tiny flame leaps to life in a shallow pit, smoke rising, curling against the rafters. For a breathless moment, you fear the roof will trap it all, but it drifts out through gaps near the peak, a primitive chimney. You huddle close, feeling warmth pool around your knees. No breeze steals it away. No daylight cuts through. The walls, crude but sealed, are finally doing their job. Historians still argue Whether such cabins ever became truly comfortable, or if warm enough to not die was considered luxury, judging by the faint draft still stroking your cheek, you suspect the latter. But for the first time since dragging your first log into place, you feel a sense of security. These walls, patched and messy, hold against the mountain air. They stand between you and the chill, between you and the night. You sit there a while, firelight flickering against clay and moss, imagining the hundreds of nameless hands that once did this same work, sealing cracks, muttering curses, smearing mud until the cabin stopped shivering. You share something with them now, across centuries, the stubborn will to carve warmth out of wilderness. And when you finally step outside, stretching your sore back as twilight bleeds into the trees, you glance at your patched cabin and grin. It's not pretty, it's not flawless, but it's starting to feel like home. The next morning, your stomach grumbles before you've even stretched out your aching arms. You glance at the jerky pouch. It's lighter than you'd like. The salty strip's nearly gone. A cabin is useless if the builder starves inside it, so today shifts from logs and mud to the question of food. The mountain doesn't deliver groceries. It demands you go out and wrestle them from trees, streams, and whatever wanders on four legs. Your first tool is memory, recalling what you noticed while dragging logs the last few days. Berries clustered near the clearing, a stream trickling not far downhill, faint trails worn by deer. The forest, if you squint, is a pantry disguised as wilderness. But tread wrong, and you'll pick poison instead of blueberries. Historians still argue whether most early mountain men relied more on hunting or on gathering, though the honest answer was likely both. Opportunistic survival, grabbing whatever didn't run faster than you. You wander toward the berry patch first. The bushes glow with late summer fruit, dark blue beads glistening like drops of ink. You pluck one, crush it between your fingers, stain your palm. Sweetness bursts on your tongue, a relief after days of tough meat. You eat carefully, not trusting every bush. One misstep could turn breakfast into slow poisoning. A quirky tidbit. Some frontiersmen swore by carrying silver spoons and touching berries to them, believing poison would tarnish the metal. Science rolls its eyes at that one, but desperate men clung to any trick that promised safety. You, with no spoon handy, simply trust observation and luck. After filling a small basket with fruit, you follow the stream. Water is life, and life gathers at its edges. You crouch low, eyes scanning the shallows. Tiny trout dart between rocks, flashes of silver in clear water. Your hands itch to try. With patience and a sharpened stick, you attempt the classic spear fisherman's lunge. The trout respond by laughing and vanishing in streaks. Hours pass, your boots soaked, your pride bruised. Finally, you cheat. Pile rocks into a crude trap, guiding fish into a shallow pocket where escape is harder. At last, you grab one, slippery and wriggling, holding it triumphantly aloft like a prize. It's scrawny, hardly a feast, but to you, it feels like victory. By midday, you've gathered berries, caught a fish, and found a patch of edible roots that look suspiciously like carrots if you squint. Your arms are full, your shirt stained with mud, your stomach growling like a bear in denial. You trudge back toward the cabin, feeling oddly like a medieval peasant returning from market day, except your market is whatever didn't try to kill you. Cooking is another test. You gut the fish with clumsy hands, the smell sharp and raw. Over your small fire pit, the flesh sizzles, skin curling, fat dripping into the flames. The aroma fills the cabin, smoky and savory, making your stomach twist with impatience. You chew the fish eagerly when it's done, the bones reminding you that patience and caution don't end once the hunt is over. Berries follow, tart and sweet, a welcome change from salted meat. Historians still argue whether mountain men truly lived off the land entirely, or if most leaned on trading posts far more than the romantic stories suggest. Likely both are true. Men bartered for flour, sugar, coffee, while still catching trout and gathering berries to stretch their supplies. You, isolated and stubborn, have no storehouse or kindly trapper nearby. The mountain forces your hand. You forage or go hungry. The quirks of the forest make you laugh despite yourself. A squirrel scolds you from a branch as though you've raided its pantry. A bird swoops down, trying to steal a berry right from your hand. Even the fish, or what's left of it, seems to mock you with 100 tiny bones. You mutter, "Fine, fine, I get it. The mountain always takes its cut." As evening falls, you sit outside your cabin, stomach finally full, watching smoke curl into the cooling sky. You've fed yourself today, not from convenience, but from sweat and chance. Each bite tasted sharper because of it, as though the mountain itself granted permission for you to remain one more day. The logs behind you, the roof above, the patched walls, all of it now feels more alive because you have something in your belly to keep living for. The cabin hums softly in your mind. Protection, warmth, and now the faintest promise of meals. Tomorrow will test you again, but tonight, as firelight glows on clay-chinked walls, you lean back and smile, with fish grease on your chin and berry juice staining your fingers. Somehow, against the odds, you're still here. The cabin holds your weight. The roof keeps the dew out, and your stomach has at least stopped growling quite so loudly. But now comes the part where you make this rough shell into something you can actually live in. A door, a window, and a floor. That doesn't leave your boots sinking into mud every time it rains. Up until now, you've been squatting in a glorified box. Today, you start shaping the space into a home. The doorway yawns open like a missing tooth. Without a door, the cabin is nothing more than a fancy wind tunnel for bears. You set to work, first on a door frame, carving grooves into the logs on either side, smoothing them just enough that a flatboard can swing. Of course, flatboard is a generous phrase. You're splitting planks from logs with an axe and hoping they don't warp too badly. The sound of each split echoes through the clearing, sharp and satisfying, though occasionally a piece flies off at a ridiculous angle and smacks you in the shin. You bite back curses, muttering instead that modern hinges are criminally underrated. Once you've got enough boards, you lay them side by side, binding them with crossbeams pegged in place. It looks more like a heavy wooden shield than a door, but it'll do. Hinges are another challenge. Metal ones require a blacksmith, and last you checked, there isn't a forge hiding behind the next pine tree. So you carve wooden pegs, crafting a pivot system. One end of the doorpost slides into a hole in the sill, the other into a notch above. It's crude. It groans like an old man whenever you shove it. But finally, the cabin has a barrier you can close. You give it a shove, hear it thud into place, and sigh, protection at last. Windows are trickier. Cut too big a hole, and you invite in the cold. Cut none at all, and you live in permanent gloom. Historians still argue whether mountain men prioritized security or comfort when it came to windows, though most evidence points to the smallest possible openings, just wide enough to let in light and maybe poke a rifle through. You carve a narrow rectangle, line it with trimmed wood, and stretch oiled cloth across it to soften the wind. Glass? That's a luxury dragged over mountain passes on muleback, not something you casually find lying around. So you squint through translucent fabric, watching the daylight blur like a watercolor painting. It's not elegant, but it lets you see the sky. The floor might be the most demoralizing task. Right now, it's bare dirt, trampled hard where you walk most. Mud creeps in when it rains, and you've already spotted ants exploring near the fire pit. Some men were content with packed earth, but you're already imagining cold nights where damp seeps into your bones. So you start splitting more planks, laying them side by side as rough flooring. The cracks gape, uneven, but it's better than sinking into muck. A quirky tidbit: some mountain men spread bear or buffalo hides across the dirt and called it flooring. Others scattered pine needles, refreshing them every few weeks. You briefly consider the needle method, then remember how badly they stab bare feet. Planks it is. By afternoon, you've got a heavy door swinging on wooden pivots, a single blurred window glowing with late sunlight, and a floor that doesn't try to swallow your boots. You step inside, pull the door shut, and stand quietly. For the first time, the space feels contained. Sound softens, light filters, air settles. The cabin is no longer just something you built. It's something that responds, shaping silence around you. Historians still argue whether cabins were cozy retreats or claustrophobic prisons. You feel both truths tug at you: pride in walls that finally close, and unease at the shadows that now trap you inside. But as you run your hand along the rough boards of the new door, you know one thing for sure. Tonight, when the wind sighs through the trees, you won't have to wonder what prowls just outside. You'll hear the thud of wood between you and the dark. And for now, that's enough. The cabin has walls, a roof, a floor, even a door that groans like an old ox when you push it shut. But none of that matters if your fire fizzles every time the wind changes. Warmth is your best weapon against the mountain night, and food doesn't cook itself on optimism. Today, your task is fire management, learning how to keep flame alive, coax smoke into the right place, and not choke yourself to sleep in the process. The fire pit you scratched into the dirt earlier worked in a pinch, but now the walls trap smoke, turning your cabin into a fumigation chamber. Your eyes water, your throat burns, and for a moment, you wonder whether you've built a shelter or a coffin. Clearly, you need a chimney, or at least a vent. Historians still argue whether early mountain cabins always had proper stone chimneys, or whether many settlers just lived with smoky rooms until someone's lungs gave out. Archaeological remains suggest both. Some find stonework in wealthier cabins, others little more than holes in the roof. You don't have time for masonry, so you aim for the crude but effective route. You carve an opening high on one wall, cutting away logs just enough to let air escape. Around the edges, you smear more mud and clay, shaping it into a funnel. It looks like something a child might sculpt, lumpy and uneven, but the draft improves immediately. Smoke drifts upward, not sideways, clearing the air inside. You cough a few last times, then breathe easier. Congratulations, you mutter. You just invented indoor air quality control. Firewood becomes your next obsession. Not every log burns the same. Pine crackles fast, but smokes like a factory, while hardwoods burn slow, steady, almost dignified. You spend hours dragging branches, splitting logs, stacking them carefully under an overhang outside. A quirky tidbit: some mountain men stacked wood in elaborate crisscross patterns, both to dry it faster and because it looked impressive to any visitors. Proof that they weren't amateurs. You try the method, then give up when your carefully balanced pile collapses in slow motion. Function beats fashion. Inside, you experiment with banking the fire, pushing ash over embers to keep them smoldering overnight. If you're lucky, you'll wake to a gentle glow rather than having to strike flint in the cold. The first attempt ends with smoke so thick you retreat coughing into the night. The second attempt works better. A slow burn humming quietly under its ash blanket. You grin in the firelight, knowing you've stumbled into a trick as old as humanity itself. Of course, the fire has its moods. It pops unexpectedly, sending sparks against your new floor. You stomp them out, glaring. One moment it warms your hands. The next it threatens to turn your entire hard-earned cabin into a bonfire. Historians still argue whether many frontier cabins burned down by accident, or if that's just another exaggeration layered onto folklore. Judging by your own near misses, you'd bet a few did. By evening, the cabin glows with steady heat. Shadows dance on clay-sealed walls, the smell of smoke clinging to every plank. You sit by the flames, staring at them until your thoughts blur. Fire is hypnotic, a friend that never speaks but always listens. Outside, the mountain air has cooled sharply, frost already nibbling the edges of the clearing. Inside, you stretch your hands toward warmth and feel a rare sense of comfort. A quirky, almost absurd detail comes to mind. Some trappers claimed they talked to their fires, naming them like pets. Old Blaze, Little Red, companions in long, lonely winters. You consider whispering to yours, then laugh at yourself. But still, when the flames gutter low, you find yourself murmuring encouragement, just in case. The cabin, once raw, logs and gaps, now holds not only your body, but your fire. The two together form a system. Walls trap heat, roof shields flame, chimney funnels smoke. It's crude engineering, yes, but it means survival. And as you watch embers pulse softly, you realize that what you've really built isn't just a house. It's a fragile pocket of warmth floating in a sea of cold wilderness. The fire flickers low, the clay-chinked walls stand steady, and the groaning door shuts out most of the night. But there's one more detail gnawing at you. Where do you sleep? The cabin floor, even with rough planks, is no friend to your back. Cold seeps up from below, reminding you that every ache in your bones has been earned by poor choices in bedding. So today's mission is simple. Build yourself a place to rest before you collapse like one of the logs you've been dragging. You start by clearing a corner, sweeping away chips, mud, and stray moss. This will be your sanctuary, a spot where exhaustion finally meets mercy. A bed frame, however crude, will lift you off the floor, away from dampness and the occasional bold ant. You split a few smaller logs, notching the ends so they lock together in a rectangle. Cross slats follow, thinner poles laid like ribs across the frame. It looks wobbly, but it holds when you lean on it. Well, you mutter, at least I won't die directly on the dirt. Progress. Now for a mattress. You tromp into the woods, gathering armfuls of evergreen boughs, their needles sharp but springy. You lay them in thick layers, piling until the frame bristles like a porcupine. Pine needles release their resinous scent as you crush them, filling the cabin with sharp, foresty perfume. A quirky tidbit. Settlers swore by pine bough mattresses not only for softness, but for pest control. The smell supposedly kept away fleas and lice. Whether that's true or wishful thinking, you're more than willing to believe it as you sink into the prickly mass. Of course, pine alone is not luxury. You toss your bedroll on top, smoothing it over the bristling layer, and suddenly, the whole thing looks, if you squint, like a real bed. Your back sighs when you stretch across it. The difference between wood planks and springy boughs, undeniable. It's not feather-down comfort, but it's enough that you wonder why you didn't do this sooner. Historians still argue whether early mountain cabins always had raised bunks, or if many trappers just spread hides on the floor. Judging by how good this feels, you'd call any floor sleeper a fool, or maybe just too exhausted to care. Still, there's room for improvement. You gather more moss and stuff it into cloth sacks, creating makeshift pillows. They're lumpy, uneven, one side always higher than the other. But when you lay your head down, the soft give is a revelation. Luxury, you whisper to no one, grinning in the firelight. As dusk deepens, you lie on your creation, staring at the rafters overhead. Shadows ripple, firelight dances, and the cabin hums quietly with warmth. You shift side to side, adjusting, testing. The bed creaks, but holds. For the first time since felling the first tree, you imagine what it will feel like to actually rest through the night, instead of collapsing into a shivering doze. A quirky aside comes to mind. Some mountain men bragged that they could sleep anywhere, on rocks, in snow, under trees, without complaint. Maybe that was true, or maybe it was bravado, masking the reality that everyone, no matter how tough, craves a patch of softness. You laugh quietly, sinking deeper into the pine mattress. grateful you don't have to prove yourself by snoring on bare stones. Historians still argue whether the cabins of solitude drove men mad with isolation or gave them peace they couldn't find in towns. As you close your eyes, listening to the fire crackle and the wind paw lightly at the door, you feel a strange blend of both. Loneliness presses in, heavy as the night, yet comfort, rough as it is, holds you too. For now, exhaustion outweighs worry. You roll onto your side, pull your blanket up, and let the first true sense of rest creep over you in this fragile new home. By now, the cabin shelters your body, the fire warms your bones, and the pine bough bed spares you from waking up shaped like a pretzel. But your stomach reminds you with a low growl. Comfort is temporary if you don't plan meals beyond today. The mountain doesn't care if you starve while sitting in a perfectly good cabin. So today, you think less like a builder and more like a provider, learning to hunt, trap, and gather enough to keep yourself alive when winter bares its teeth. You start with the obvious: game trails. You've already seen faint tracks pressed into mud, narrow paths threading through the underbrush, deer, maybe elk, even rabbits, leaving their quiet signatures. You crouch low, fingers brushing fresh prints, the dirt still soft. The animal passed not long ago. Your pulse jumps. You're not the only living thing in this forest, not by a long shot. Of course, hunting isn't as simple as charging after a deer with an axe. You set to crafting snares instead, using cord made from twisted bark fibers and a bent sapling for spring. The loop rests innocently across the trail, waiting for an unlucky rabbit. It feels almost unfair, though you remind yourself dinner doesn't care about fairness. A quirky tidbit? Some trappers baited snares with shiny metal trinkets, believing rabbits were curious enough to investigate. Whether that's clever or absurd, historians still argue if such methods ever actually worked. You settle for simple: bait with a few berries and hope for the best. Next, fishing again. Yesterday's trout barely qualified as a snack, so today you think bigger. You weave a crude basket trap, weaving willow branches into a funnel shape. Weighted with rocks and sunk in the stream, it waits silently while you gather wood. The fish may be laughing at your clumsy knots, but you trust patience will win. And then there's the bow. Every mountain man dreamed of one, even if only a few managed decent craftsmanship. You cut a flexible branch, whittle it down, string it with sinew saved from earlier scraps. It creaks alarmingly when bent, but it holds. Arrows are another challenge. Straight shafts shaved from saplings, feather fletching scavenged from a hawk's dropped plume. You notch one, pull back, and release. It flutters sideways, embedding itself in the dirt like a drunk wasp. You sigh, muttering, "So much for Robin Hood," and try again. Practice, after all, is survival's only tutor. Food isn't just about meat. You return to gathering roots, berries, and nuts, paying closer attention now. Hickory nuts crack under your hammer, yielding rich kernels. You dig tubers from damp soil, their earthy smell promising stew material. The forest becomes a map in your head, each tree and shrub cataloged as friend, foe, or potential meal. A quirky discovery. Chewing on willow bark dulls your headache. A natural aspirin used long before pharmacies. You tuck that knowledge away, Grateful the forest sometimes gives medicine alongside food. By evening, you return to your cabin with modest success. A couple of fish wriggling in your basket trap, a rabbit dangling limply in your snare, and a pouch full of nuts and roots. It's not a banquet, but compared to your early days of jerky and desperation, it feels like feasting. You skin the rabbit carefully, grimacing at the mess, then roast it slowly over the fire. The smell is mouth-watering, smoky meat mixing with pine resin and clay. Your stomach clenches with hunger, but you wait, learning patience the hard way. Historians still argue whether mountain men were genuinely self-sufficient hunters, or if most leaned heavily on native knowledge and trade. The truth likely lies between. Without local guidance, many would have starved, no matter how tough they thought they were. You, stumbling with clumsy snares and crooked arrows, can almost feel those unseen teachers shaking their heads. When the rabbit meat finally crackles and browns, you tear into it with gratitude. It tastes gamey, wild, nothing like the mild meats of home, but it fills you. The fish follow, roasted until skin blisters, eaten with berry-stained fingers. By the time you lick the last grease from your hand, you're more satisfied than any city feast ever made you. The cabin, the fire, the bed, they all matter. But this meal, earned with sweat and stubbornness, seals your claim on the wilderness. You lean back, firelight flickering on your tired face, and realize survival is not just about building walls. It's about learning to dance with the land, to coax it into giving without taking too much, to eat because you dared to try. Tonight, you're not starving. Tonight, you've learned a little more of the mountain's rules, and for once, you fall asleep with your belly full, pine-scented bed holding you, fire humming softly nearby. Morning breaks with a cold slap of air, sneaking in through the tiny cracks in your cabin walls, reminding you that survival isn't just about today's meal, but tomorrow's, and the day after that. One full belly means little if the next week leaves you gnawing bark. This realization leads you to the frontier's unglamorous truth: preservation. Meat rots fast, berries shrivel, roots mold. Without a plan, your hard work could vanish in a matter of days, leaving you staring at an empty pot while winter sneers. The fire, as always, is your ally. Smoking meat becomes your first experiment in the long-term survival. You build a crude rack from green wood and drape thin strips of rabbit over it. The fire below smolders more than flames, sending tendrils of smoke curling upward. You sit close, feeding damp wood and moss to keep the smoke thick, waving it into the meat like a ward against hunger. Hours pass. The strips darken, dry, stiffen. You chew one cautiously, tough as boot leather, salty if you'd had salt, but edible. And that word, edible, is enough to mean hope. Salt itself is a luxury. In this wilderness, you don't stumble across neat little bags of it on store shelves. Some mountain men packed it in from trading posts. Others scraped it from saline springs or boiled down brackish water. Without it, preservation gets trickier, and meals taste like chewing on disappointment. You sigh at your lack of seasoning, chewing smoke-dried rabbit, and pretending it's gourmet. A humorous thought crosses your mind. Perhaps future historians will laugh at you the way you laugh at early recipes, suggesting a pinch of salt, as if a pinch could be found here. Roots and berries demand different tricks. You dig a shallow pit near the cabin, line it with stones, and cover it with pine boughs. Into it, you stash tubers, nuts, and anything else that won't survive long indoors. The earth's cool embrace slows decay, a primitive refrigerator humming silently beneath your feet. Every time you pass, you pat the mound like a loyal friend, praying it keeps your food fresh until you need it. Then comes rendering fat, an unpleasant, greasy ordeal, but worth it. Fat means energy, and stored properly, it lasts. You boil scraps until the liquid fat floats, skim it, and let it harden into pale cakes. These can be eaten, smeared on dry bread, if you had bread, or mixed with berries into a survival paste oddly cherished in old journals. You gag at the smell, but tuck it carefully into a clay pot, sealing it with wax. Hunger has a way of turning disgust into delicacy. Historians note that early settlers often failed precisely here, not in hunting or building, but in storing. Fresh kills rotted, flour spoiled, vegetables froze. Those who thrived weren't always the strongest, but the cleverest preservers. You feel the weight of that lesson as you watch smoke curl around your drying rack, as you bury another bundle of roots, as you seal away the fat. Each step is less dramatic than felling trees or fighting storms, but far more vital. And then there's the question of trade. A nearby trapper might swap salt or flour for pelts or smoked meat. Trading posts became lifelines for mountain men who knew better than to hoard everything for themselves. You imagine trudging miles with a bundle of furs on your back, bartering for something as simple as salt, and realize how precious the ordinary becomes when survival sharpens your perspective. Evening finds you inspecting your stores like a miser counting coins. A row of smoked meat strips hanging near the hearth, clay pots with rendered fat cooling inside, a pit full of roots and nuts hidden like buried treasure. It's not much, but it's a hedge against hunger, a promise to your future self that you'll see tomorrow with strength left to work. You tear into one strip of smoked rabbit, teeth working hard, jaw aching, but each chew filled with pride. The taste is dry, acrid, but the satisfaction comes not from flavor, but from foresight. You built a wall against starvation today, and that's worth more than any feast. Lying on your pine bough bed, you listen to the soft crackle of the fire, your thoughts drifting. Preservation, you realize, is more than food. It's preserving your strength, your will, your place in this wild world. Smoke curls upward, carrying your day's labor into the rafters, and you drift off to sleep with the faint, comforting smell of survival clinging to your clothes. The steady supply of food, preserved and tucked away, gives you confidence, but not complete safety. Winter looms like a shadow in the back of your mind, and while hunger may gnaw, cold can kill faster. Insulation becomes your next obsession. The cabin is sturdy, but gaps still whisper with drafts, and the wind has a cruel way of finding every weakness. One icy gust through a chinked seam can undo all the comfort you've worked for. So, you pick up where survival demands, sealing, layering, and preparing for the bite of snow. First, you circle the cabin like a suspicious neighbor, inspecting each joint, each seam between logs. Clay and moss have held decently, but here and there, gaps gape wider than you'd like. You kneel, pressing handfuls of fresh mud and moss deep into the cracks, smearing it until the wall looks like patchwork. A small job, tedious and muddy, but essential. You joke to yourself that the cabin is getting its spa treatment, a facial mask of wet clay for the wrinkles in its skin. If only it could say, "Ah," back. Then you eye the roof. Bark shingles overlap, but some lift with the breeze. A snowfall could pry them loose, sending cold water dripping into your dreams. Climbing up, you nail down extra slabs, weigh them with stones, and smear more clay where the seams seem weakest. It's precarious work, balancing on slick bark while the wind tries to tip you, but you cling like a determined squirrel, muttering that death by falling off your own cabin would be too embarrassing to explain to future historians. Inside, you turn to floors. Planks, while better than dirt, still leak cold. You scatter rushes and straw across them, creating a soft, insulating mat. The crackle underfoot becomes oddly comforting, a reminder that you've outsmarted the earth's chill, if only slightly. Some settlers even spread animal hides across their floors, layering them thick until the entire space looked more like a hunter's den than a home. You glance at your modest pile of hides and drape one near your bed, promising yourself you'll add more when luck improves. Now comes the windows, or rather, the lack of them. A cabin like yours doesn't boast glass panes. Instead, thin openings cut into the walls allow a little light, plugged with oiled cloth or greased paper. You stretch hide across your small slit, pinning it in place with pegs. Light turns dim, but drafts diminish. Historians still argue whether mountain men preferred darkness for warmth or brightness for sanity. You lean toward warmth. No amount of daylight is worth freezing through the night. For added insurance, you fashion a sort of inner curtain, more hides, more cloth scraps, draped across the doorway to trap the fire's heat inside. The effect is immediate. The cabin feels smaller, cozier, womb-like, and with the fire burning low, you can almost imagine the storm outside will be powerless to reach you. Of course, insulation isn't only about walls and roofs. It's about yourself. You've already learned to layer shirt, coat, hide, but winter demands more. You begin stitching scraps of fur into mittens, clumsy but warm, and line your cap with extra moss for padding. A quirky tidbit. Some trappers swore that stuffing moss into boots not only warmed their feet, but absorbed sweat, preventing frostbite. You try it, and the squish of moss beneath your toes makes you chuckle. It feels less like footwear and more like walking on a swamp. As dusk arrives, you test your fortress. You build the fire low, sit on your bed, and wait. The cabin breathes, warmth around you, the air still and snug. The only sound is the faint whistling of wind, muffled now by your layers of clay, bark, and hides. You run your hand over the wall, feeling its solid resistance, and smile. For the first time, you believe you might actually outlast the cold. A final thought crosses your mind. No amount of insulation guarantees safety. Storms can topple roofs. Frost can creep through walls. Fire can undo all your work in minutes. Yet, survival has always been a gamble. Tonight, the odds feel a little better. Wrapped in your layers, you lie back, the cabin holding you close, the mossy pillow cradling your head, and drift into sleep, knowing that the war against winter is one you're prepared to fight. Winter finally arrives, not with a gentle dusting of white, but with a blizzard that howls like wolves circling your cabin. Snow piles against the walls, rattles across the bark roof, and seeps in through every tiny seam you somehow missed. The fire crackles defiantly, smoke curling up the chimney, while you huddle in your pine bough bed and listen to the storm batter your handiwork. It's the final test, whether all your cutting, hauling, chinking, smoking, and patching was enough to keep you alive through the season that has no patience for mistakes. You rise, breath fogging the air, and add more logs to the fire. Each one pops and hisses as frost melts, releasing sharp wood smoke that clings to your clothes. You warm your hands, then shuffle to the clay pots. Inside, your rendered fat waits, pale and waxy, a promise of calories when hunting is impossible. You slice off a chunk, drop it into your stew pot with a strip of smoked rabbit, and stir as the mixture bubbles. It tastes greasy, tough, and faintly bitter, but every swallow delivers heat to your stomach, fuel to your muscles. Survival rarely comes in the flavor you'd prefer. The days shorten, the nights stretch. Sometimes the snow piles so high against the door that you have to dig your way out like a badger just to fetch firewood. You chop and stack logs obsessively, fearing the day the pile runs low. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some pioneers claimed they burned as much energy hauling firewood as the fire gave back in heat. You can't help but laugh grimly at the truth of it. By the end of each trip, sweat steams from your coat, even as icicles hang from your beard. Inside, the cabin becomes your entire world. Shadows from the flames leap across clay-daubed walls. The smell of pine boughs lingers, though needles are already drying, turning brittle beneath your bedding. Occasionally, you replace them with fresh cuttings, pretending you're enjoying a luxury mattress makeover, when really it's just staving off splinters in your back. Historians still argue whether solitude in such cabins drove men mad or gave them a strange kind of peace. As you sit staring into the fire, hours passing without thought, you feel both truths tugging at you. There are moments of humor, even in hardship. Once, a squirrel squeezes in through a gap near the roof, scampers across the rafters, and stares down at you as if judging your moss-stuffed boots. You shoo it away, muttering that you won't share rations with freeloaders. Another time, melting snow drips through the roof and lands square on your forehead in the middle of the night. You jolt awake, curse softly, then laugh. After all, if that's the worst the storm can throw at you, you'll take it. Nights stretch longest. You sit listening to the wind, trying not to count how many smoked meat strips remain. The world outside is buried under ice, yet inside, you've carved out a fragile bubble of warmth. Your breath mixes with wood smoke, your eyelids grow heavy, and your body sags into the bed you built. Even loneliness softens under the blanket of routine. And here, as the storm howls on, the story slows. You let the fire sink lower, watch the embers pulse like sleepy heartbeats, and let your mind drift into softer places. Imagine the hush of falling snow beyond the walls, the muffled quiet of the forest at rest, the weight of the cabin holding you safe against the night. Your hands are rough, your muscles tired, but each task you've done, chopping, patching, smoking, stuffing moss, has layered safety around you like a quilt. So, let the blizzard roar. You are inside, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in time itself. Tomorrow will bring more wood to haul, more repairs to make, more hunger to battle. But for now, there is only this: the hush of snow, the steady crackle of the hearth, and the rhythm of your own slowing breath. Rest comes not with triumph, but with surrender. You've built enough, you've stored enough, you've fought enough. Tonight, the cabin stands, the fire glows, and your eyes grow heavy. Sleep drapes itself across you like another hide, soft and certain, carrying you gently into dreams where no storms intrude. And now, as our time together closes, let's slow everything down. Picture that cabin again, not with the labor of chopping or hauling, not with the sting of cold in your lungs, but with the calm that follows. Snow drifts softly against the walls, piling higher and higher, yet muffling the forest in a blanket of silence. Inside, the fire burns low, glowing embers painting the room with a quiet red shimmer. You stretch out on the pine bough bed, the air warm around you, the storm distant, no longer a threat, but a lullaby. Every sound fades into softness. The creak of wood becomes a steady rhythm, like the cabin breathing alongside you. The faint crackle of fire is no longer urgent, but slow, almost like a whisper telling you it's safe to close your eyes. You've worked enough. The cabin holds, the food is stored, the warmth endures. There is nothing more required of you tonight. Let your thoughts drift as snowflakes outside drift to earth. Imagine them swirling gently, piling without hurry, each one a tiny silence settling across the wilderness. Your mind grows as still as that snowy forest, your body heavier with each breath. In this quiet, you don't need to build or chop or patch. You only need to rest. The mountain has slowed, the night has softened, and your story is safe here. So let go. Sink into the warmth. Allow sleep to carry you deeper than any blizzard could reach. Good night, my friend. Rest easy and let tomorrow wait.